All right, so that's that one back in there. I want to do a whip and tongue graft too. Now, whip and tongue graft, a little bit different. A little more challenging cut. If you get into doing it, they're stronger grafts. There's a lot to say. They have a lot to recommend them. I like whip and tongue a lot, but again, I wouldn't start there. Move a couple things out of the way. So here's the rootstock. I've got the cutting board. And for whip and tongue, we need to make a diagonal cut across the rootstock. It would be better to do it down here, but I actually bought kind of thick rootstocks. It gets kind of hard to cut. I'm going to do it up higher, just because I can make a cut through there. And I want to make a cut on a cutting board like this. Out on the card table, I'll use a bunch of layers of cardboard. Wow, this is tough, actually. I'm glad I'm cutting it up here because I don't think I can do that cut down there. Thick wood, wow, that's a tough one. Just stand up, get a little more leverage. Now, people that do a lot of grafting, they do these cuts right in their hands, which terrifies me, and I won't do it. So that's why I have a cutting board. I'm a lot less likely to injure myself. That's not a bad cut. Just hold this up. That's not a bad cut. You can see how thick the rootstock is. That cut is probably 4 times as long as the rootstock is in diameter. That gives us lots of surface where we can match cambial tissue up. That's really great, and it gets even better when we put the tongue in for the whip and tongue, but that's the start of it. Now I'd probably set this thing down inside my moist, kind of flopped over bit of newspaper while I cut the sign wood. Get a piece of sign wood. Okay, here's my bundle. Well, that's not too bad. All of this sign wood that I have is actually thinner than my rootstock. And mostly for whip and tongue, you want to have the rootstock and the sign be the same diameter. If not quite the same diameter, you want the rootstock to be thicker than the sign, because just like we did with the cleft graft, we got to match the edge up. So rather than putting them together kind of centered and not have any cambial connection at all, we push this off to the edge so that there's cambial connection on one side. But you can see, yeah, that's pretty close. This is a little thinner. All right, I'm gonna make the same kind of a cut on the sign wood here. And oftentimes, here's a bud on the sign wood. I want to make my cut, let's see if I can hold this so that you can see it. I want to make my cut diagonally across here with that bud pointing out. I'll show it to you when I finish the cut here in just a second. As with the wedges of sign wood that you make for cleft grafting, you should probably practice this a bunch of times and make sure you're getting the kind of cuts that you want before you execute on scarce sign wood or expensive rootstock or whatever like that. Practice a whole bunch. Now that one is actually a little bit longer than that one. That's going to be okay. It's not ideal. You want them to be about the same, but what I'm going to end up doing is trimming a little piece off the end of this so they'll be the same. Now those are the diagonal cuts. And then for whip and tongue graft, we also make a cut down into along the axis, just like we did with the cleft, but we're starting on this cut, this diagonal cut surface, and we're not doing it right in the center. Let's see, initially, before I do anything else, I'm going to cut these to about the same length. You can see that one's about 1/4 of an inch longer. Just going to trim some off of that. I'll use these. All right, so there's my sign wood. It's trimmed to length. You can see these aren't the same shape even, but they're about the same width and length. So there we go, like that. That's sufficient. You could imagine in an ideal world you'd have this perfect ellipse, kind of stretched out circle thing on both of them. That would be perfectly the same shape on both. They'd mesh together absolutely perfectly and everything would be wonderful. In practice that doesn't usually happen, and what we have here is plenty sufficient for a good graft. But we need the tongue cut. Once you have the diagonal cuts done like that, we need to make that tongue cut straight down the axis, but we don't do it in the middle. If I was going to do it in the middle, I'd be starting out there. I want to actually start a third of the way down from the tip, about like that. Practice these cuts, and boy, if you're going to do whip and tongue, be safe. In fact, you might consider using this thing. For me, it's a little awkward, and I've done enough of them, I'm not worried about it. But I'll start a third of the way down like that, and again, I'm holding my hands tight to my body so that as I wiggle this blade, that blade isn't going anywhere because it can't. It's just stuck in my hands, which are stuck to my body. As I rock it, I'm going 1/10 of a millimeter at a time, just tiny little bits, and you might be able to see I'm starting to make the cut right there. So carry that on down along the axis of the wood until I've got a cut that's about as down as far as thick as the blade is across. So that's one tongue cut. You can kind of see. I'll do that on the other one too. So that was our cyan wood, and there's that first bud I was talking about before. There's another bud right here. I'm going to cut just above that, so I've got 2 buds on here. There's our finished piece of cyan wood. I'm going to avoid touching any of the cut surfaces. There's our finished cyan wood as a bud on either side of my thumb, on opposite sides of the cyan wood. I'll set that down and make a tongue cut down the center of my rootstock. That's this one. Again, for safety's sake, keeping my hands tight to my body. This is where I cut myself, is on this, making the tongue cuts. That's what's bad. Okay, but with experience, you don't do that anymore. All right, that's not bad. It's about as deep a cut as the blade is across. Perfect. Now what we want to do is flip these 2 things together, and the tongues catch each other. Now I'm going to hold that up. The cyan wood here is a little bit redder, so you can kind of tell the 2 apart, and maybe a little difficult to see, but I actually have a zigzag now. The cut surface goes across, the diagonal surface goes across like that, but there's a axial cut down each one, and those axial cuts fit together, so you end up with something like this. Kind of like that, interlock, very strong. That's one thing I like about them over cleft grafts, but also there's the potential for a huge amount of cambial contact. You can go this whole zigzag thing and get cambial contact along that whole thing, and there's another one on the other side. So there's like probably a total of 4 or even a little bit more inches of possible cambial contact there, which is 2-3 times what's on the cleft graft. These don't match up perfectly, as you can see. We have this surface of the diagonal cut on the cyan that's sticking up above the rootstock. It's actually the same thing over here, but a much smaller piece of the diagonal cut still exposed on the rootstock. None of that worries me at all. If I can get it perfect, I will, but this is going to turn out just fine. So those are locked in together. Get out our... I'll just do this one with putty tape. You have to be a little bit careful when you're dealing with these just grafted things, because you can knock them loose. But that said, I haven't knocked too many loose, so... Oh, I forgot to pick off the buds on the rootstock. Go ahead and do that all the way down. It's much more likely that higher up buds are going to try and grow. But save yourself some time and hassle and just get them all now when they're in your hand instead of awkward down on the ground or something in a pot. This, I cut this so high, this rootstock, that there's an awful lot of buds to remove, but okay, got them down as far as the roots. It's good enough. So here's my little piece of buddy tape, and I want to start the coverage as I wrap below any exposed cuts, because I don't want any of that stuff to be exposed to the air. There. Cool, that's covered pretty well. Just to show you, you can see where the cut is that's still exposed, like we were looking at a minute ago, and my buddy tape is wrapped up beyond that, all the way up to this bud even. Could go over the bud and it'd be fine, grow right through it. On the other side, same kind of thing. That's where that little bit of exposed diagonal cut on the rootstock is, but I started below it, so it's all covered up. So this one's ready to go too. Put it right back in the bucket. Actually, yeah, I probably would actually take another piece of buddy tape and seal the tip, unless I didn't have enough of it, and then I might dip in some candle wax instead. When you do that, you know, you've got fire right here. You could put it under your wood and just burn the whole thing up and kill it. But what you do is you wait till you have a good pool of wax in here and you dip it fairly quickly, and it won't damage the nutri at all. It'll be fine. Since I've got buddy tape, I'm going to finish sealing cyan wood up. Okay, good to go. Nice and strong. Set it back in the bucket of water. That one was out a whole lot less time, so less apt to have been injured by drying out. So that's cleft graft, which is super easy, can be done really safely with a CD or something like this to protect your hand. Always should emphasize that all of these cuts that you make, you want to keep your hands close to you as possible, so that you're just doing little tiny bits at a time, and a sharp knife helps you cut little bits at a time without pushing hard, so that you would push into where your hand is. If you take care and do a lot of practicing on sample material first, you'll get good cuts and you'll be doing it safely. Take it easy, take it slow, and gain experience with it so that you don't cut yourself. That's it on these. I do want to, I'll do this with my foam, but I'm going to take the foam back out in the garage so I can show people my buckets of finished grafts and sand and whatever like that. But that should do it for now. So I'm going to take the mouse here and just click on out. Thanks for watching.